Oh, this is hilarious. Much of the demand for EVs has been driven by governments themselves, keen to push their employees into electric vehicles to create false demand, make it look like everyone wants one. This has certainly been the case in the US, where the previous Biden administration, drunk on the green Kool-Aid, spent billions to push the EV and net zero agenda, including vowing to electrify the entire fleet of over 600,000 government vehicles and installing thousands of EV charging stations at government-run locations. But now, in a flash, it's all changed, and as well as exiting the Paris Agreement and vowing to remove the EPA's draconian tailpipe emissions regulations, which is an EV mandate in drag, he's now shut down all of those 8,000 EV charging stations. And not only that, all of those thousands of government-purchased EVs are going to be sold off as well. Or, well, more likely given away, as nobody on earth would want to buy them. Has any president in history done so much good in so little time? Welcome back to MGUY, British engineer and lawyer, now Sydney-based YouTuber. If you enjoy this video, please drop a like and let me know what you think by leaving a comment. And if you want to keep informed about all the EV and net zero insanity that we're suffering at the moment, click that subscribe button down below and enable notifications so you don't miss out on any future videos. It's just the same here in Australia, as I'm sure it is in the UK as well. The government here is as bonkers as Biden's or Starmer's when it comes to net zero zealotry, and has its ministers and employees driving around in Chinese EVs, including the cybersecurity minister, clearly oblivious to the threat posed by those spying machines on wheels. Check out my video on this up here or in the link in the description. And splashing wheelbarrow loads of taxpayer cash providing charging stations at government facilities. All part of the grand scheme to transition, a regular concept in the Biden government, the government fleet from evil fossil fuels to wonderful electric vehicles. So let's take a nostalgic look back at a couple of gushing press releases from the General Services Administration, the agency that deals with all this kind of stuff, back in the bad old days, starting with this cracker from October 2022. GSA and VA bring solar-powered EV charging stations nationwide. Washington, D.C., in support of the Biden-Harris administration's efforts to tackle climate change and the president's federal sustainability plan requiring the federal fleet transition to zero-emission vehicles, ZEVs, the General Services Administration, GSA, and the Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, announced a contract award for the purchase of 140 solar-powered electric vehicle charging stations at 34 sites around the country. VA is leaning in on the acquisition of ZEVs and taking this innovative step to support those electric vehicles with the purchase of Solar Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment, EVSE. The 140 solar-powered EVSE stations maximise VA's flexibility on charging because they are both mobile, rely on carbon-free electricity for the vehicles, and are independent of the grid. Each EVSE station is equipped with 4 charging ports that will support VA's growing fleet of ZEVs. We're thrilled to be partnering more closely with VA to build a more sustainable future for its fleet and its facilities across the country, said GSA Administrator Robin Carnahan. We look forward to helping VA and all of our federal partners transition to electric vehicles, saving taxpayer dollars and building a brighter future for coming generations. Yeah, that won't be happening, I can tell you. They'll be going back to regular combustion cars because not only are they cheaper, but they don't have to waste so much time charging. Time that I'm sure government employees filled with scrolling their phones, perhaps. And here's another just a few months ago in 2024. General Services Administration announces $25 million for electric vehicle charging ports as part of President Biden's Investing in America agenda. Washington, the US General Services Administration, GSA, announced today $25 million for electrical vehicle supply equipment, EVSE, or EV charging ports at federal buildings across the nation as part of President Biden's Investing in America agenda. An initial planned spend of just over $20 million through the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, will support 32 projects across 21 states at 33 federal buildings for a total of 782 ports to help build a convenient and reliable EV charging network for the federal government's electric vehicle fleet. Remaining funds from the $25 million, if any, will go towards additional EVSE projects. This investment furthers the goals outlined in President Biden's federal sustainability plan, which requires federal agencies to transition the largest fleet in the world to all electric by acquiring 100% light-duty zero-emission vehicles, ZEVs, annually by 2027. And acquiring 100% medium and heavy-duty ZEVs annually by 2035. At the start of the Biden-Harris administration, the federal fleet included fewer than 2,000 ZEVs out of 600,000 vehicles overall. Since the start of the administration, the federal government has ordered over 58,000 ZEVs and has begun installing more than 25,000 charging ports, adding to the 8,000 already in use across the government. Well, the rest of that is the same kind of flannel as the first one, and perfectly illustrates the net zero bubble that Biden's government was inhabiting. But now that bubble has well and truly popped, as Trump wields his machete of cutting government waste and rightly shuts the whole thing down. Trump is turning off all 8,000 EV chargers at all federal government buildings. The administration also wants EVs purchased under previous mandates offloaded. Electric vehicles are not mission critical, said the Trump administration, which has ordered all EV chargers located at federal buildings to be shut down nationwide and newly purchased EVs to be offloaded. This comes on the heels of pausing already promised EV infrastructure funding. The U.S. General Services Administration, or GSA, is the federal agency responsible for contracts and procurement as they relate to the government's real estate, IT, products and equipment, which includes vehicles. According to The Verge, there are several hundred charging stations managed by the GSA, which amounts to roughly 8,000 charging ports across the country. And now they're going to be turned off. As GSA has worked to align with the current administration, we have received direction that all GSA-owned charging stations are not mission critical, said an agency email viewed by The Verge. Neither government-owned vehicles nor privately owned vehicles will be able to charge at these charging stations once they're out of service. These EV chargers were available for government-issued EVs as well as those personally owned by federal employees. An internal announcement is scheduled to be made next week. However, some federal offices have already been instructed to take their chargers offline. Good. None of this was driven by either economics or efficiency. It was driven by blind ideology, which cost the poor taxpayer billions for expensive EVs and infrastructure and sapped productivity from an already sclerotic government. Thanks to the near vertical depreciation of those EVs, they won't even get much back when they're sold on. And that's taxpayer money that should have been used carefully and wisely, and instead was splurged on a fantasy agenda and is now gone forever. It's a scandalous waste, but unfortunately completely predictable. We see it here in Australia as well. It's what happens when the insane zealotry of net zero is allowed to trample over everything else, including common sense.